Thanks very much for joining today. And I'm very grateful to be here and to share a presentation with you, which I hope will be productive and fruitful. I look forward to your comments and feedback following. In keeping with the INN, I'm hoping to truncate my presentation, keep it to about 15 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, so that we can have an extended conversation. And that's a format that has proved very fruitful in the INN presentations I've attended. So let's stick with that.
Okay.
And let's move on to the next slide here. Come on. There we go. So who am I? Well, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I am a career educator. And I have a very long interest in educational neuroscience, dating back to when I was first hatched as an educator in the late 1980s. You know, that's a stretch for some of you to remember what was happening in education at the time, but it was an exciting time as I was just emerging as an educator, because there was the first currents of neuroscience that started to really infuse my training and the first few positions that I held. And I was very captivated by that. I had a science background as well, and I looked forward to applying what I was learning at that time, roughly coinciding with the 1990s and the beginning of the digital revolution, into my career as an educator. And not long after I began my career as a teacher, I was frustrated with conventional education, and I co-founded and launched two innovative education programs in BC, two different schools, and they were oriented to personalized learning, which was infused with a lot of the educational neuroscience of the day, and it was very helpful with with the structures that we were introducing and the program that we developed. And one of those programs, called Self-Designed Learning Community, is still an ongoing concern in BC, with about 2,500 kids registered in it. It's an independent secular program, also oriented to personalized learning. I maintain my interest in educational neuroscience from that time I was minted as a teacher, to this day. And that's, of course, going back quite a ways now. I finally caught up with the opportunity to do my own research, extend my own research into learning. And that was the focus of my PhD that, as Randy mentioned, I completed just over a year ago, through the Faculty of Education. And my orientation and my research was to personalized learning, and that it reflected many tenets of neuroscience, and neuroscience as it has evolved since I first contacted in the late 1980s. And there certainly has been many changes to go along with it. At the outset of my presentation today, I'd like to tee up a brief survey for you to ponder. Now, we're not all in the same room today, so I can't do a show of hands or anything, but for you neuroscientists in the audience, I would like you to just reflect for a moment and consider, what percentage of your research and findings do you refract through a lens of education? Maybe 100%, maybe it's all the time, maybe it's 50%, maybe it's closer to zero for you to hold on to. And for the educators, and that may just mean you're switching hats, I ask you to ponder, how many of you refract your educational praxis, including your curriculum choices, classroom strategies, your evaluation processes, through a lens of neuroscience? What percentages might that be? Might it be 100% or 50%, close to zero? Does it vary? Well, again, just hold on to that for now, and we'll hopefully get to discussing that perhaps at the end. I'm going to suggest that just to go back for a second, I'm going to suggest that there isn't much crossover between the two domains. And I say that based on my experiences as an educator, a long time as a student and an instructor of educational neuroscience. And yeah, maybe it's helpful to clarify what I mean by educational neuroscience, and that is the fusion of educational praxis and theories of education with insights and research from neuroscience. So I also wish to start my presentation today with a premise, and that is that every educational act, gesture, and state correlates to our neurobiology. Now, I offer a listing here of some of those gestures and acts and states. I'm sure if we pondered it together, we would extend this list by, maybe 3 or 4 times. But for every moment, if every moment of living reflects our neurobiology, then surely every educational act and gesture also reflects an aspect of neurobiology, something going on, something that's occurring in the transactional process of learning. And to that premise, I'd like to add a goal, and that is to hopefully get you to recognize the importance of strengthening the integration of the generally disparate domains of neuroscience and education, and reconceptualizing how this might be effectively accomplished. After many years of participating in this, I can confirm that the state of such integration has made much progress, but it remains kind of fuzzy and confusing and subject to some pretty sketchy whims, especially from the realm of education, which often has some significant political influences and other winds blowing through that buffet it and change its direction and nature. Student learning suffers because of this, I believe, and this also contributes to some educator burnout. And in the next few minutes, I hope to share some insights into the landscape of educational neuroscience that may offer some guidance on moving forward. But I will say that to address this challenge, it's going to need your insights, your help, your collaboration. Okay, to just give you a snapshot of a little historical profile of educational neuroscience, I would posit that people have been thinking about humans and human learning for a very long time, and recognizing influences, reward systems, designing crude learning regimes. Perhaps you think of training of slaves or military or apprenticeship programs that may go back a couple of millennia. People have been, applying and different practices to these for a long time. With the scientific revolution, the exploration of learning focused on determining, I'd say, the isolated mechanisms of learning, and seized on behavioral training of horses and pigeons, rats, dogs, monkeys, and simple and motor cognitive skills of humans. An example of that would be the revelatory insights and research and positions by a German psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus in the 1880s, who brought forward his theory of curved learning. And I won't spoil your fun in looking that up and reading more about it, but it had to do with the curve of learning, referenced how quickly we can forget strings of nonsense words. And you'll be surprised, if you read about that research by Ebbinghaus, to what extent it really influenced human learning and theories of learning that were developed at that time. But I would suggest the biggest experiment of all came when industrialists influenced schooling to adapt standardization and tenets of efficiency that were keyed to simplistic theories of human intelligence. One example of this was the scientific management principles developed by Frederick Taylor in the early 1900s, coincided with the pulse of industrialization that was overtaking the Western world. And Frederick Taylor and Taylorism emphasized efficiencies to increase productivity and profits. This flourished in factories and was also taken up by school administrators, often being influenced by the lieutenants of Taylorism. And essentially, Taylorism, vanquished the individual person through mass schooling practices like standardized instructional delivery and assessment. And this is best exemplified, I believe, by this machine that I've shown here, which is known as Pressey's automated teaching machine. This machine is on display at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington. And what you'll have to understand is that imagine a student sitting at this, maybe a teenager, sitting at this, and they're fiddling with the levers in the bottom right and responding to a question that they see on the drum that extends from the machine to the lower left. And if they press the right lever, it's based on multiple choice testing. If they guess the correct answer, a candy pellet is dispensed down the chute. And there's a little example of a candy pellet there, the white object you'll see at the bottom of that little chute. And the drum or cylinder will then advance to the next question. And you may think, gee, I've seen a version of this machine, and you wouldn't be incorrect at all. This was really the progenitor of computerized testing, particularly Scantron testing that I remember from the 70s and 80s, and versions of which really still live with us today. But I think that deeply reflected aspects of Taylorism. There was some pushback to Taylorism and behavioral training, and it came in subsequent decades through fledgling developments in neuroscience and refinements in educational techniques, introduction of new technologies that were seeking to explore the black box, or otherwise the black box of the human brain and the human mind, particularly. In the 1980s, I would think that one of the most important developments was the theory of multiple intelligences brought forward by Dr. Howard Gardner at Harvard University, and also the rise of holistic learning, holistic psychology, developed by Uri Bronfenbrenner, recognizing an ecological state or much more complex state of affairs influencing human behavior, human learning, than was previously advanced, particularly through the behaviorists. And in the 1990s, which was the decade of the brain, I'm sure most of you remember that, or at least Randy and I do, that there were many new developments that emerged, and they started to inform educational neuroscience, educational practice, and were brought into it with much success and much enthusiasm. And that's the time I was a young educator, young teacher, and I was taken up by many of these, and particularly the first paper I remember reading by Kane and Kane, acknowledging or minting brain-based learning. And I still have a copy of the paper. It's still available. And the 12 principles that they identified as related to brain-based learning still hold up really well, in my opinion. During this time and really up until today, I'd say there's been an ever-expanding catalog of issues that are challenging educators, rooted in psychological disorders, emotional, behavioral, attentional, substance abuse issues, eating disorders, a wide range of issues. And neuroscience educators and neuroscientists have have worked together, collaborated in many instances to address those issues fruitfully, to address and mint the subject of self-regulation, or the notion of emotional self-regulation. It was during this time that the insights from Dr. Temple Grandin came to the fore, and she really helped to her insights really helped to shape and revise our insights about autism and what it was like to be an autistic person and the kinds of issues that they were dealing with. The blogosphere helped really crack this open, and we finally saw instances from other autistic people who were sharing insights into their life, and we finally understood to a much deeper level what it was like to be an autistic person and what helped resolve some of their issues and challenges. During this time, we've seen the rise of personalized and differentiated approaches to education and the emergence of many resources and texts, white papers, articles, fads, technologies, and organizations. This slide shows just some contextual texts and developments coinciding with the rise of educational neuroscience and the adoption of personalized approaches to learning. It's a sampling of some resource texts. The headline there from the Brain-Based Learning paper of 1990, graphic from BC's education plan that continues to trumpet, this is the K-12 education system I'm referring to, continues to trumpet the attributes of personalized learning as an orientation, and also the schema from here identified as UDL, or the Universal Design for Learning, that is oriented to neuroscience. I'll have more to say about that in just a moment. Here's some other texts here. This slide just really shows some additional references and developments coinciding with the rise of educational neuroscience and adoption of personalized or differentiated approaches to learning. UDL is in there, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, or CASEL. That too is endorsed by the BC Ministry of Education. There's the Social and Emotional Learning Lab at UBC, Mind, Brain, and Education Journal. Some things have come and gone in the past couple of decades, but these are ones that continue to have a positive and productive presence in the field. I would say that, on reflection, that there's been some major victories in the past 30 years in this field. The acceptance of multiple intelligences and holistic learning, principles of holistic learning, neurodiversity, social emotional learning, personalized differentiated learning practices, initiatives pertinent to DEI, First Nations learning, and these are present in educator training and administrative support to some extent, and there's a wide variation implied in that right across North America. I can't speak for really what's going on in the rest of the world, but I do track what is going on largely across North America. And when I refer to the educational field, I'm thinking of K-12, but additionally post-secondary, lifelong learning initiatives, adult learning initiatives, et cetera, and geriatric learning as well. But educator exposure to educational neuroscience, I believe, remains low, and teaching remains tied to standardized and many outmoded practices or outcomes and neuromyths. For example, the brain as a machine, or that genetics trumps epigenetics, or that learning is synonymous with installation of knowledge. And I think that frameworks such as UDL, Universal Design for Learning, is unfortunately overly complexified. And that's also true for many texts and modules that are rooted in educational neuroscience. And that really leads to some confusion about aspects of what should be emphasized and what might be the most effective role for educational neuroscience. Things that are too confusing get educators rather flustered because they're extremely busy in fulfilling their contractual obligations. Because of this, I think the future of educational neuroscience is at some risk of degrading, and it'll offer some suggestions and a framework of a response to this. One, I think that neuroscience and education must strengthen their relationship, and that nothing will change if this doesn't happen at all institutions, including SFU. I believe that the basis of that strengthening will come through integration that helps, has a goal of effectively nurturing learning success across all educational demographic sectors and pertinent to all age of learners. I think that neuroscience in helping be part of the solution to this, helping address these challenges, will need to draw from research into the subjects I list here. And also, I share a caveat that any part of a solution in addressing, formulating a solution to the challenges, that it should be resisted. Attempts to install excessive neuroscience in the minds of educators should be resisted. That is a characteristic of some of the solutions out there, some of the texts, some of the modules, some of the workshops. I just attended one a couple of weeks ago, and I just was thumping my head the whole time, going, "This is way too complex for most educators." But that an appropriate, a pragmatic approach is to brainstorm in collaborative ways to test solutions, to survey the results, to pivot approaches and retest, resurvey, re-implement. I included 3 examples here to consider. Oh, I see my time's ticking along, so I'll tee these up quickly for us to consider. But these are some issues that are authentic, they're pertinent issues, and I think they give my goal in sharing these is to give you, especially the neuroscientists, some example of what does an issue, an educational neuroscience issue, look like in an educational context, and what, to invite you to consider how you might contribute to helping resolve one of these issues. So here's this first one, but it's not a great stretch of imagination to understand the authenticity of this situation arising in almost any educational context. My students are highly distracted by social media devices, classroom socialization. I'm constantly managing this issue, and it's exhausting me. So this is the challenge to the educator. By way of a response, I might frame it to initially seek to recognize the neurobiological roots of such an issue. Is it rooted in an issue of motivation or socialization or regulation? All of these. Maybe survey the class to help identify some solutions and enact these collectively. So recognizing the social nature of learning and identifying how people can pro-socially help contribute to resolving it in a classroom situation. You may have your own ideas about how to resolve that. Maybe you pop those out, share your ideas in a follow-up conversation. Second issue, I think it's pretty authentic as well. I have a student who was robust, doing very adequately last term, but now is appearing fatigued, preoccupied, and anxious, is underperforming on assignments and tests. What can be done about this? If I was looking at this situation, I would seek to determine, well, what could be the reasons that this is emerging in this way? I'd want to interview, survey the student. Maybe there's parents to include in this, or other caregivers. Try to determine what is behind this. Then enact a plan, collaborate on devising a plan to shift it, rooted in neurobiology, test it, review it, pivot it, retest. Third example I would share, and this is one that did happen for me, is so I can vouch for its authenticity. I have a student with an autism diagnosis. He's been significantly behind in a number of areas for several years. He's received support funding for some special ed services, such as occupational therapy adjustments and tutoring. Then he surprised me in completing a project of his own initiative that was just off the charts, and it was very well done. Now he is unsure of what to do next, and I collaborated with him and his parents and his support team. We had several meetings to determine, well, what might, what is this really all about? What are what could possibly be going on here neurobiologically and educationally, psychologically, and identifying what were some of the next steps that this student really wanted to take. And so we enrolled him and his parents, his entire support team, in devising a plan for his future. It was a big shift, and it was very exciting. It was a very positive outcome to this. So as I wind up here, I'd like to suggest a framework to develop an educational neuroscience at SFU and strengthen the liaison between the INN and the Faculty of Education through, one, creating a special initiative to survey current state of integration of neuroscience and education across critical areas of critical interest, such as educator training, the Center for Educational Excellence, undergraduate studies perhaps, and following that survey to recommend appropriate actions to address gaps, strengthen integration. I also see, I suggest strengthening this liaison through creating opportunities for interdomain exchange and presentations, schedule and host a joint conference or seminar series emphasizing educational neuroscience for educators and interested faculty. In 2019, UBC did this, and the Faculty of Education, in collaboration with their Brain Research Center, put on a one-day seminar series for educators. I think there was about 90 educators there. I was one of them. It was outstanding, and it was specially funded. The funding is gone for that. It was, of course, it was just pre-COVID as well, and but an opportunity like that, I think, served the community of educators and the Faculty of Education and Brain Science at UBC very well. And I see the beneficiaries of these types of initiatives to be educators and students, families, counselors, alumni, faculty departments, and the institutions themselves. With that, I offer my conclusion to this presentation, and I now look forward to your comments and questions. And of course, I'm happy to refer back to any slides that you may wish to review again.
Well, thank you, Michael, again for taking the time with us today. I'm glad we got a chance to do this. This is definitely the start of the conversation, definitely not the end of the conversation. I'm glad we opened up this dialogue, and I'm hoping that we have other forums. We actually planted a seed potentially for having some sort of a new workshop that the Institute could potentially coordinate with education, and try and have like a one-day meeting of the heads, as it were, to, yeah, exactly.
Fusion, yeah.
precisely. So again,
It
thank you
can
very
be
much.
very worthwhile, Randy. I'm very happy to contribute to that end if I can.
Thank you all for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.